Hi, I'm Andrew Berry and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. Recently on some of the Facebook groups, there's been a few messages with a few people asking the best way to clean the area between a bezel and a back plate. Now, I've got a few products in front of me that will really help us clean it, and I've got my favorite way to clean, and I think it's one of the best ways that we can do it. But you really have to think back and think right at the start, what is the best way to avoid having to do a lot of cleanup between our bezel and this back plate. The back plate is where the stone sits into the bezel that we've made, and in this instance the back plate slightly protrudes by about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters wider than the bezel, and I want this to be nicely polished. So think, when you come to solder the bezel, if the outside edge is going to have a lip and you're going to see the outside of the bezel and the back plate, well then you don't want to put your solder on the outside. Because the stone is going to go in the center of our bezel here, we can put the solder on the inside and then the solder will be hidden. Remember that wherever you place solder onto a surface, no matter how careful you are with your soldering, the solder is going to run on the surface, whether it be the upright of the bezel or the bottom of the back plate. And as soon as the solder flows, it'll be there forever until you try and clean it up. Sure, you can come along with your wheels, you can try and grind it off, you can try and buff it off, you can try and polish it off, you can try and silver plate over the whole piece to try and disguise the fact there's a bit of discoloration from the solder. But why bother with all that hassle, with all that fuss, when if you put the solder on the inside of the bezel, the solder will flow on the inside, and then where you apply the heat to the outside of the bezel, the solder will be pulled through under the bezel just to that edge, just to the edge, just to that joint between the outside edge of the bezel and the back plate. The solder will come and cause a beautiful, beautiful fillet. It won't flow anywhere along the back plate, it won't flow up the side of the bezel because the solder has come through from the inside. And providing your bezel is completely flat to the back plate, you don't put too much of a clamp on top, or you don't put too much binding wire or anything like that that's going to distort it. It's resting upon the back plate, it's flush, you fluxed it, it's a beautiful, beautiful joint. Well then, you will then have the most easiest job cleaning up this area between the bezel and the back plates, because there will be no solder there. The solder will be on the inside of the bezel. So that's the first little trick. A lot of people will apply the solder to the outside and then hoping then the solder will flow inside. If the back plate needs to be seen, don't put solder on it. It's completely wrong. Put the solder on the inside. Anyway, you get where I'm coming from. So we've done our job. We've put it in the pickle. It's lovely, lovely and clean. Now we need to try and just polish up. We don't have to remove solder. There's no excess solder. So we just have to polish. These little 3M wheels that I've got, this one's had a hard life, as you can see. Brilliant. Nothing wrong with these. I don't like them because they tend to, these ends tend to break off far too easily, far too quickly. You don't get a good polish straight away from using the one mop, although that is brilliant for getting in that area between the back plate and the outside of the bezel. You can try these little natural hair brush as well. This is like a cup brush, just as good again to get in there to clean up. Remember, we're not having to remove metal, we're not having to remove solder, we just need to polish up the surface. That's all we need to do. Come along with a steel wheel. This is another option to get more of a matte sort of finish. Rubber wheel. not much point having a rubber wheel. Rubber wheel is great for removing excess metal. We haven't got any excess metal to remove. So we come to my favorite, and I know everybody is having problems getting these brushes. Here in the UK, these are 21mm white nylon brushes. You can buy goat's hair, you can buy white bristle brushes that look very similar to this. This is quite black. Here's a new one to show you. This is what they look like when they're new. Gorgeous. They're white, it's a nylon. I find that these do not shed the bristles like a goat's hair or a natural bristle brush, which is what this little cup brush is. They don't shed, which means you're not coming home picking up bits of goat's hair from your top of your apron. These do not shed. These are great, great mops. You don't have to go worry about going down through various grades to get the required finish. This is a bezel that we've been producing here on At The Bench, which is our online jewellery training website at thebench.com. And I am just going to start to polish this now. We made sure that the bezel was lovely and clean and polished beforehand. We made sure that the back plate was lovely and polished beforehand. Another tip, polish up all these pieces before you assemble them. It's going to make your life so much easier. And what you can see on here now is where we put this through the pickle, through the safety pickle, through the acid, and we've got a fine silver layer over the surface. We want to return back to that lovely shiny look. 21mm, I'm sure you can buy them in roughly the same sort of sizes in your country where you are. I know that the Americas, I think you can get 22mm with a 3/32 shank that fits into your hand pieces. Over here in the UK, it's a 2.35mm shank and they're 21mm. Eye protection, I've got a block of Tripoli. You can use, in fact, let me use my old one. You can use Menzurna, brilliant polish. This is a bristle, this is not a bristle brush, this is a white nylon brush that I've been using before. You can see how it's gone from that lovely white nylon finish to this black, and that is because we're using this dark Tripoli. So get your pendant motor, your flex shaft. In fact, I'm going to put my visor on so I can get in nice and close to this. And we can use this to get right into that area. Now remember, we're not having to remove metal. We are purely polishing. There is no excess solder to remove. And we are simply using this brush, replenishing that polish quite often initially. The more polish you have on here, the more aggressive it is. And then as you're coming around and you think, do you know what, that's looking pretty good. Keep the speed high, ease off on the polish. And as you can see, literally within, what's that, minute and a half, I have produced a beautiful, beautiful finish, exactly where people have been finding it really, really hard to get that area, that 90-degree area, nice and clean. That was just using. You can see what a beautiful joint we've got, and you can also see how shiny. If you want to, now this is part of a project I'm doing here on At The Bench, but you would be mounting this perhaps on a ring, or you would be putting a bail on the top, or some other type of fixing. Then I would get a very soft woolen mop, a little bit of rouge, and again, exactly the same way. This is quite a scalloped edge to this bezel, so I'm going to have to take really good care that this mop does not get caught in this scalloped edge. Plus, I have only purely wiped this edge with a rag. I should really clean it through an ultrasonic or hot soapy water, but just for the sake of this particular film, you can grab your nice soft mop, come on the outside, I'm just going to do in this area by here, and as you can see, we have got a beautiful, beautiful finish within a couple of minutes. So my tip is to think about what you're doing. Think about the next stage. If I do this particular stage, what's next? I'm going to have to clean and polish it. Am I going to be able to clean and polish the next stage? It's going to be a bit awkward. So what steps can I do to make my life a little bit easier when it comes to clean and polish it? I know what I can do. I can clean and polish the pieces before I put the item together. I can make sure that I limit the amount of solder. I can make sure that I don't use excess solder. I can make sure that the solder doesn't flow where I don't want it to flow. Think, I can put the solder on the inside of the bezel, comes out just to the edge. There's no excess metal to remove on the outside edge of this lip. This would also apply if I was soldering this bezel onto a flat plate as well, and the stone sits in the middle. Because the stone sits in the middle, it hides all the little bit of solder that you can see on the inside here where the solder has flowed. You can imagine trying to get this area that would be looking like this on the outside, beautifully clean and polished. It's nearly impossible to get a perfect professional finish. So think ahead, what steps can we put into place to make sure that the next step is going to produce the best possible finish. So I hope that goes somewhere to showing you how we can clean up the outside of the bezel and the back plate. If you've enjoyed this film, please, I'd love you to share it with your friends, and don't forget, if you haven't done already, please click subscribe. Also click that little notification bell, and then you'll get notified every time we put a film up on At The Bench's YouTube channel. So in the meantime, thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next film. Bye bye.